I folded my life into boxes, sealed them shut, turned a key in a lock for what might be the last time, and stepped onto terrain offering no guarantees. The familiar city receded without ceremony. There had been a morning, pale and unremarkable, when the thought of placing everything I owned into storage seemed theatrical, almost indulgent, as though it belonged to someone braver and less tethered than I had ever been. Yet the tape drew tight across cardboard flaps, the metal door of the unit rolled down with a hollow rattle, and the decision, once abstract, acquired weight and temperature and a pulse of its own. I remember standing in that narrow corridor between lockers, feeling the faint vibration of other people's lives sealed beside mine, and recognizing that trepidation has a rhythm very close to anticipation. The two beats difficult to separate when you are listening from inside your own chest. Orlando received me with a brightness that felt deliberate. Heat there gathers on the surface of buildings and drifts upwards, bending the sunlight so the air above the canals seems to quiver, shimmering faintly as the city exhales. Palms tilt their fronds toward the water. Pavement softens in the afternoon glare. The sky performs its wide blue insistence. At the pond's edge, a heron waits, dragonflies skim across the water, and frogs crouch among the reeds. Damp earth mingles with the sweetness of flowering plants, interrupted occasionally by the sharper scent of food drifting from an unseen kitchen. Traffic hums at a distance, braided with the whisper of wind through the alleyway and the low complaint of a boat resting at its dock. A bird lifts abruptly from a branch, and the air briefly rearranges around the absence it leaves behind. In that rearrangement, there is proof of motion, of something having been here and then choosing another direction. And I feel in my own body a corresponding adjustment, subtle yet undeniable, as though my pulse has aligned itself with the low electrical current of the place. It was there in that brightness that I sat across from a friend I had not seen in years, our glasses sweating onto the table between us, and listened as she described a private certainty she had carried since childhood, a conviction that events would incline towards her survival, that even missteps would arc back into something usable. She spoke without bravado. The words lay plain on the table. I recognized them with a small shock, as one recognizes a melody heard long ago and never named. I had always attributed my own history to stubbornness or to luck, to the fortunate accident of doors opening at the moment I reached for them. Yet, as she spoke, I traced the pattern backward and saw how often I had acted as though the ground would meet my foot before I placed it down. There is research that circles this idea with charts and data. Participants were asked to walk a path where money had been scattered in full view. Those primed with bleak expectations kept their gaze lowered inward, rehearsing disappointments, and passed by the bills without a flicker of recognition. Others, instructed towards optimism, noticed the currency almost at once, their attention turned outward. The money had weight and color and edges, regardless of belief. What altered was the field of vision, the willingness to let the eye rest on possibility. I think of this often, the way perception snakes around assumption, and I consider how many small mercies might lie at my feet each day, waiting for a glance that stays long enough to register their presence. When I decided to travel for a year, the concept possessed the hazy unreality of a story told about someone else. I pictured the storage unit, the absence of a fixed address, the long corridors of airports, and felt the quickened beat of doubt. Yet the body proceeds through tasks even while the mind trembles. Forms are signed, flights are booked, keys are handed over, action accumulates. With each completed step, the pulse steadies. Confidence, I have come to think, is built from these increments, from choosing again and again in favor of the life that frightens you slightly, until the fear begins to register as proof of expansion rather than threat. Courage gathers quietly, decision by decision, until one day it feels less like performance and more like habit. In recent interactions with writers, I have watched this same rhythm play across their faces. Pages tremble in their hands, voices catch. There is a moment when silence swells and threatens to claim the room. I recognize that swell intimately. I remember the girl I was, pressed against a locker, words stalled somewhere between throat and mouth, a friend bracing his palm beside my shoulder so I could not slip away before speaking what had been bruising me all week. The hallway smelled of metal and paper and adolescent cologne. My pulse thudded in my ears so loudly I believed others could hear it. Speech arrived in fragments. Nothing catastrophic followed. The world held. That memory does not shame me. It feels tender, almost sacred, because it contains the origin of a practice I continue now. None of this came easily. Each instance of articulation required a private reckoning, a calculation that silence would cost more than revelation. Over time, those reckonings shortened. The interval between impulse and expression narrowed. The body learned that it could withstand exposure. The pulse, once frantic, adopted a steadier tempo. Writing operates within this same physiology. A blank page carries the hush of that high school corridor, the sense that whatever is spoken will echo outwards. Many wait for a transformation that will grant immunity from embarrassment, a permission slip signed by some external authority. I have searched for that document. I have found only the act itself, the placing of words where there were none, the willingness to let them stand long enough to be seen. The first offering arrives with fear. The second retains traces of that fear. Gradually, through repetition, a cadence forms. You begin to trust the beat beneath the sentences, the internal pulse that guides one clause into the next. Looking back across the year of travel, across the bright water of Orlando and the dim corridor of the storage facility, I trace a single line connecting them, not straight yet continuous. The friend who named her certainty, the scattered bills on the pavement, the heron poised at the pond's edge, the girl at the locker, the writers lifting their pages towards the light. Each scene carries a variation of the same rhythm. So, as footage of that city flickers past, as sunlight fractures against glass and birds startle the air into brief arrangements, I return to the sensation that accompanied me when I first closed the door of my former life and stepped outward. Trepidation and anticipation sharing a bloodstream, a pulse steady enough to follow. For those of us who write, who gather language from the ordinary heat of afternoons and the private chambers of memory, that pulse becomes both compass and companion. It asks only that we listen, that we place one word after another in time with its beat, and that we trust the path will appear beneath our feet as faithfully as it has before.